You. In SEAL training? The laughter rolled across the Coronado mess hall before Emily Carter even reached the coffee station. Metal forks scraped against trays. Chairs squeaked across the tile floor. Somewhere near the back, somebody whistled low under their breath like they had just heard the funniest joke on the base. Emily didn't react. She kept walking with the same calm pace she'd carried through the last 4 weeks of training prep, her boots making soft thuds against the polished navy floor while the early California sunlight spilled through the windows overlooking the Pacific. The handbook tucked under her arm looked older than everyone else's. Corners folded. Notes sticking out between pages. Wind charts written in faded pencil. Logan Pierce leaned back in his chair with a grin stretched across his face as 2 other trainees laughed beside him. At 6'3" with broad shoulders and the confidence of someone who had been told his whole life he belonged in elite units, Logan had become the loudest voice in the barracks within days of arriving. No, seriously, he called out louder this time, drawing more eyes toward Emily. Did she actually say sniper school? More laughter followed. A few trainees turned around openly now, watching her the way people watched storms forming offshore. Emily stopped briefly near the coffee machine and poured herself a cup without rushing. Steam curled upward into the fluorescent lights above. You know Barrett rifles weigh almost 30 pounds, right? Logan continued. Or are they giving out lighter ones now? Someone snorted into their orange juice. Another trainee shook his head. Man, this is gonna be painful to watch. Emily finally looked over. Her face stayed completely neutral. Blonde hair tied into a regulation bun. Pale blue eyes steady and unreadable. Nothing about her expression matched the tension slowly building around the room. We'll survive, she said quietly. Logan laughed again, louder now because she hadn't fought back. You hear that? We'll survive. He slapped the table once. That's confidence right there. Several trainees joined in. Others stayed silent, pretending not to listen while clearly listening to every word. Near the far wall, Chief Ramirez stood beside the exit doors holding a clipboard against his chest. Unlike the recruits, the senior instructor wasn't smiling. His eyes stayed locked on Emily for several long seconds before drifting toward the weathered notebook under her arm. Emily picked up her tray and moved toward an empty table near the windows. She sat alone facing the ocean. Outside, waves crashed against the distant shoreline while helicopters moved low across the morning sky. The sounds of the mess hall faded behind the steady rhythm of pages turning as she opened the notebook carefully. Numbers filled the margins. Handwritten formulas. Wind corrections. Elevation notes. Tiny sketches of scope adjustments. Logan noticed it immediately. Look at that, he said. She's actually studying this stuff. One of the trainees laughed nervously. Maybe she thinks reading makes you a sniper. Logan smirked. Nah. Sniper school breaks people. Especially quiet ones. Emily took a slow sip of coffee without looking up. But one of the younger trainees sitting 2 tables away frowned slightly as he watched her hands. They didn't shake. They didn't fidget. Every movement looked measured. Controlled. Familiar. Like somebody who had done the same routine 1,000 times before. Logan stood and started walking toward her table. Tell me something, he said as the room gradually quieted again. What made you think you belonged here? Emily closed the notebook softly. Her eyes lifted toward him for the first time since sitting down. Calm. Cold. Almost distant. I never said I belonged, she replied. I said I was coming. The silence that followed felt heavier than the laughter before it. Even Logan's grin faded for half a second. And across the mess hall, Chief Ramirez slowly lowered his clipboard, staring at Emily Carter like he had just recognized a ghost nobody else in the room could see. The barracks quieted down after breakfast, but the tension followed Emily Carter through every hallway of the training compound like a shadow that refused to disappear. By noon, nearly everyone at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado had heard some version of the story. The quiet blonde transfer wanted sniper school. The woman sitting alone with old notebooks thought she could survive one of the hardest pipelines in military training. Every retelling added something new. Some said she had failed another unit before arriving. Others claimed she had family connections inside naval special warfare. By afternoon, the rumors had spread so far that even supply clerks near the armory were whispering when she walked past. Emily ignored all of it. She moved through the base with the same calm rhythm as before, carrying a range bag over one shoulder while the Pacific wind rolled cold across the concrete walkways. At 1600 hours, the trainees gathered outside the classroom building for land navigation review. Logan Pierce leaned against the wall near the entrance, surrounded by the same small group that seemed to follow him everywhere now. "There she is," he muttered as Emily approached. "America's next sniper legend." A few trainees chuckled quietly. One of them shook his head. "I still do not understand why they let women into this pipeline." Logan smirked. "Because somebody in Washington likes headlines." Emily kept walking without slowing down. But as she passed them, another trainee named Ethan Cole frowned slightly. Ethan had stayed mostly quiet since training began. Former Marine Corps infantry. Older than most of the class. Less interested in impressing people. He noticed something the others did not. Emily's range bag looked heavy. Much heavier than standard classroom gear. Yet she carried it effortlessly without shifting her posture once. Logan noticed Ethan staring. "What?" he asked. Ethan shrugged. "Nothing." But it was not nothing. Earlier that morning, Ethan had walked past the outdoor training lanes before sunrise and seen Emily alone near range 14. She had been lying prone in the dirt with an unloaded rifle platform beside her, practicing breathing patterns while small strips of tape fluttered from wooden stakes in the wind. No instructors. No audience. Just repetition. Over and over. The kind of repetition that looked less like training and more like memory. Inside the classroom, Chief Ramirez began. Reviewing ballistic calculations and environmental factors. Most trainees scribbled notes while half paying attention. Logan whispered jokes under his breath. Someone in the back checked football scores on a hidden phone. Emily sat near the far corner beside the window, writing quietly in the same weathered notebook from breakfast. At one point, Ramirez stopped speaking mid-sentence and stared directly at her notes. "Carter," he said. "What are you calculating?" Every head turned. Emily looked up slowly. "Crosswind drift correction, Chief." Ramirez folded his arms. "For what distance?" 1,800 yards. A few trainees laughed immediately. Logan leaned back in his chair with a grin. "Sure. Why stop there? Make it 2,000. Emily did not respond. Ramirez walked closer to her desk and looked down at the notebook. His expression changed almost instantly. Tiny handwritten formulas filled the page beside detailed wind sketches and angle corrections. Some notes looked years old. Others had fresh pencil marks layered over faded ink. Ramirez stared several seconds longer than expected before finally speaking again. "Where did you learn this?" The room went silent. Emily closed the notebook gently. "From someone who believed missing was unacceptable." Logan rolled his eyes. "This keeps getting better." But Ramirez did not laugh. He stepped back slowly, studying her face with growing intensity, like a man trying to remember where he had seen someone before. Then the final bell sounded, breaking the moment apart. Chairs scraped backward. Conversations returned. Logan stood first, shaking his head while walking toward the exit. "Tomorrow is live range day," he called over his shoulder. "Reality is going to hit hard. Emily remained seated until nearly everyone left the room. Outside the windows, the sun dipped lower over the Pacific, casting orange light across the training grounds. And somewhere beyond the distant firing ranges, a single rifle shot echoed through the evening air. The next morning began long before sunrise. Cold ocean air drifted through the training compound while most of the barracks still slept under dim red emergency lights. At 0400, Emily Carter was already outside near Range 14 wearing a gray sweatshirt beneath her training vest, kneeling beside a weather monitor planted in the dirt. The Pacific fog rolled low across the empty firing lanes, swallowing the steel targets positioned deep into the darkness. Emily adjusted a small strip of orange tape tied to a metal stake and watched how the wind carried it. Slow. Left to right. 3 miles per hour at ground level. Stronger farther out. She wrote numbers quietly into her notebook while the distant sound of waves echoed beyond the base perimeter. Behind her, boots crunched softly against gravel. "You always do this?" Ethan Cole asked. Emily glanced back briefly. Ethan stood several yards away holding a coffee cup in one hand, still looking half asleep beneath his knit watch cap. "Do what?" she asked. "Study the wind before everybody else wakes up." Emily returned her eyes toward the range. "The wind wakes up before everybody else." Ethan smirked faintly at that, though Emily's expression never changed. He looked across the empty firing lanes and noticed something unusual beside her gear. A Barrett rifle platform rested on the shooting mat. Not issued for trainee use. Not standard equipment. Even unloaded, the rifle looked massive against her smaller frame. Ethan frowned. "Where did you get clearance for that?" Emily zipped the range bag closed without answering directly. "Old equipment check." Ethan stared at her another second, clearly unconvinced, before movement near the barracks interrupted the moment. More trainees began emerging into the gray morning light, laughing loudly while carrying gear toward the range trucks. Logan Pierce spotted Emily immediately. "Unbelievable," he muttered to the others. "She actually sleeps out here now." Several trainees laughed as they approached. Logan looked down at the Barrett platform and shook his head slowly. "That thing weighs more than your entire backpack." Emily stood calmly and slung her notebook into the range bag. "Good thing I am not carrying feelings too." Ethan coughed suddenly into his coffee, hiding a grin. Logan narrowed his eyes. "You know what your problem is?" he asked while stepping closer. "You think acting quiet makes you dangerous." Emily looked at him evenly. "No. Experience does that." The atmosphere shifted immediately. The surrounding laughter faded just enough for everyone to notice. Logan opened his mouth to respond, but Chief Ramirez appeared from the far side of the range before he could speak. "Enough talking," the instructor barked. "Gear inspection in 60 seconds. The trainees scattered quickly toward the equipment tables. Emily knelt beside her range bag while Ramirez moved through the line checking rifles and optics one by one. When he reached her station, he paused. His eyes dropped toward the worn notebook partly visible beneath her equipment. "You keep records on all your adjustments?" he asked quietly. "Yes, Chief." "How long?" Emily hesitated almost too long. "Several years." Ramirez studied her face carefully. "Sniper candidates usually start keeping notebooks after selection." "Not before." Emily finished securing her rifle sling. "Maybe I started earlier." Before Ramirez could ask another question, Logan called out from 2 lanes away. "Chief, are we actually wasting live range time babysitting people who cannot qualify?" A few trainees laughed nervously. Ramirez did not. His voice turned cold instantly. "The only thing wasting my range time right now is your mouth, Pierce." Silence spread across the firing lanes. Logan looked away first. Emily remained still beside her gear, but Ethan noticed something again. Even after the confrontation, her breathing never changed. Calm in. Calm out. Like somebody who had already lived through pressure most people could not understand. Then the loudspeaker crackled overhead. Live fire qualification begins in 10 minutes. Across the fog-covered range, steel targets slowly rose from the darkness one by one. And for the first time since arriving at Coronado, Emily Carter looked less like a trainee and more like someone returning to a place she already knew too well. The fog had barely lifted when the first round of qualification started. Trainees lined up shoulder to shoulder along the firing lanes while instructors moved behind them checking optics, bipods, and data cards. Steel targets stretched across the distant terrain from 600 yards all the way past 1 mile, barely visible against the pale California hills. Wind rolled unevenly through the valley, shifting every few seconds just enough to make long-range corrections difficult. Chief Ramirez stood near the center lane with a stopwatch clipped to his vest. "You miss because you rushed," he called out sharply. "You miss because you ignored the environment. Out there, the wind does not care about your confidence." Logan Pierce adjusted his rifle with a grin that had not faded since sunrise. Several trainees watched him closely. He had scored near the top in physical evaluations and made sure everyone knew it. "Watch and learn," he muttered before dropping prone onto the mat. The first shots cracked across the range one after another. Some steel targets answered with clean metallic pings. Others stayed silent while instructors marked misses on clipboards without emotion. Logan performed well at first. 600 yards. 800. 1,000. Clean hits. His confidence grew louder after every successful shot. "That is how it is done," he said while cycling another round through the chamber. A few trainees nodded in agreement. Then the wind changed. The next target stood nearly 1,400 yards away across uneven terrain where heat distortion shimmered above the dirt. Logan adjusted quickly and fired. Mississippi. A second shot followed. Miss again. The grin disappeared from his face. Chief Ramirez glanced down at the spotter scope. "You are chasing the wind instead of reading it," he said coldly. Logan clenched his jaw and fired a third time. Another miss. Silence spread through the nearby lanes. Emily Carter watched quietly from the far end of the range while writing notes into her notebook. She had not fired yet. Ethan noticed that instead of watching the targets directly, Emily kept studying the environment around them. The grass movement. The drifting dust. The tiny waves forming across the heat mirage beyond the firing line. Like she was reading something invisible nobody else could see. "Carter," Ramirez called. "You are up." Conversations faded immediately. Emily stepped forward carrying her rifle platform with calm, controlled movements. Logan leaned back from his lane with a faint smirk returning to his face. "This should be interesting." Emily lowered herself onto the shooting mat and adjusted the bipod carefully against the dirt. Her breathing stayed slow and steady while the wind tugged softly at loose strands of hair near her collar. Chief Ramirez handed her the range sequence card. "You have 5 targets. Increasing distance. Minimal correction time." Emily nodded once. "Understood, Chief." The first target appeared at 800 yards. Emily fired. Ping. Immediate hit. No reaction. No celebration. She simply adjusted the scope slightly. The second target stood farther out. 1,100 yards with stronger crosswind movement. Several trainees expected hesitation. Instead Emily exhaled softly and squeezed the trigger. Ping. Another clean hit. Logan stopped smiling completely. Ethan folded his arms slowly while watching through binoculars. Emily's movements looked too smooth. Too practiced. Like someone repeating muscle memory rather than solving problems in real time. By the third target, even the instructors had gone quiet. The wind shifted hard across the valley just as Emily settled behind the rifle. Most shooters would have paused. She did not. Her eyes tracked the mirage near the hillside for barely half a second before she adjusted elevation by a tiny fraction and fired. Ping! The steel rang out again. A low murmur spread through the trainees. Logan stared toward her lane with growing disbelief. "No way," somebody whispered behind him. Chief Ramirez lowered the spotter scope slowly, his expression tightening more with every shot. Then he looked down toward the old notebook resting beside Emily's mat and finally understood something that made the silence around the range feel suddenly much heavier than before. The murmurs across the firing line never fully stopped after Emily Carter's third consecutive hit. Trainees who had laughed at breakfast now watched her through narrowed eyes, searching for mistakes that never seemed to come. The Pacific wind continued shifting through the valley in unpredictable bursts, rattling loose brass against the concrete tables behind the lanes, but Emily remained motionless behind the rifle as if the environment itself had slowed down around her. Chief Ramirez stepped beside the spotter scope again while another instructor adjusted target distances farther into the hills. "Next target," Ramirez announced. 1,600 yards. A few trainees exchanged looks immediately. That distance pushed most shooters beyond comfortable qualification range. Even experienced candidates struggled once the environmental corrections started stacking against them. Logan Pierce folded his arms tightly across his chest. "She misses here," he muttered under his breath. Emily settled deeper behind the rifle stock, one eye focused through the optic while her gloved fingers rested lightly against the adjustment dial. No wasted movement. No visible nerves. Ethan watched from 2 lanes away and noticed something strange again. Emily never blinked rapidly like the other trainees. She never shifted impatiently while calculating corrections. Every adjustment came with calm precision, like she had already solved the problem before touching the rifle. The wind monitor near the firing line beeped softly. 6 miles per hour crosswind. Then 8. Then back down again. Logan shook his head slowly. "Impossible shot," he whispered. Emily ignored the voices around her completely. Instead she looked past the target for a brief moment, studying the mirage shimmering across the dirt hills far beyond the steel plate itself. Chief Ramirez noticed it immediately. Most shooters stared directly at targets under pressure. Emily was reading the terrain instead. Her finger tightened gently against the trigger. Crack. The rifle report echoed across the valley. For nearly 2 full seconds, nobody moved. Then the steel target rang sharply in the distance. Ping. A stunned silence swept through the firing line. One trainee lowered his binoculars in disbelief. Another looked toward the instructors, expecting somebody to call the shot lucky. Nobody did. Logan's expression hardened instantly. "No chance," he said. Quietly. "No beginner does that." Emily cycled the bolt smoothly and remained focused through the scope while instructors confirmed impact readings downrange. Chief Ramirez stared at the spotting data longer than necessary before finally speaking. "Direct center mass hit," he announced. Several trainees looked genuinely uncomfortable now. The atmosphere around the range had changed completely. Earlier that morning, Emily Carter had been entertainment. Now she was becoming something harder to explain. Chief Ramirez handed another range card toward her lane. "Final qualification target," he said. "Extreme distance evaluation." Ethan glanced toward the far hills and immediately understood why the instructors sounded more serious. The final steel silhouette sat nearly invisible against the terrain over 1 mile away. Heat distortion warped the air around it so heavily that the target looked like it was floating underwater. Logan exhaled slowly beside his rifle. "Nobody hits that consistently," he said. "Not in this wind." Emily finally sat up from the mat and looked toward the distant hills with calm blue eyes. For the first time all morning, she seemed almost somewhere else entirely. Like the range in front of her had triggered an old memory she never expected to revisit. Chief Ramirez noticed it too. "You all right?" Carter?" he asked carefully. Emily blinked once before returning to the present. "Yes, Chief." But as she repositioned behind the rifle again, Ethan caught sight of something near the edge of her collar where the sweatshirt had shifted slightly beneath her vest. A faded scar crossed high along her shoulder near the base of her neck. Not training related. Old. Clean. The kind left behind by somebody who had spent time in places nobody talked about openly. Ethan stared quietly while Emily adjusted the optic one final time. Logan saw the scar too, and for the first time since training began, the confidence in his face cracked just slightly. Because suddenly the quiet woman nobody respected anymore did not look inexperienced at all. She looked like someone who had already survived things the rest of them were still pretending to understand. The wind intensified as the final qualification target came online. Dust rolled low across the distant hills while heat waves twisted the silhouette until it barely resembled steel anymore. Several trainees stepped closer behind the firing lanes, curiosity overpowering discipline now. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. Chief Ramirez checked the range monitor once more before speaking. "Target distance," he announced calmly. 1 mile, 140 yards. A few recruits muttered under their breath immediately. Even experienced marksmen respected distances like that. One mistake in wind call, elevation, humidity, or timing could throw the shot completely off target. Logan Pierce stared through borrowed binoculars toward the steel silhouette barely visible against the terrain. "No way she hits this," he said quietly, though his voice no longer carried the same confidence from earlier. Emily Carter remained prone behind the rifle, studying the environment in complete silence. The Pacific wind shifted again, colder now, cutting diagonally across the valley floor before curling upward near the hillside. Instead of adjusting immediately, Emily closed her eyes briefly. Ethan noticed her breathing slow even more. Calm in. Calm out. Like someone shutting out every distraction except memory. Chief Ramirez crouched beside the spotting scope. "You have one shot for qualification," he said. "Take your time." Emily nodded once without looking away from the optic. The range fell almost completely silent around her. No jokes. No whispers. Even Logan stopped talking. Then something unexpected happened. Emily slowly lowered the rifle without firing. Several trainees exchanged confused looks. She reached beside the mat and opened the old notebook carefully, flipping through worn pages covered in faded calculations and handwritten range sketches. One page stopped her completely. Ethan could not see the writing, but he noticed her expression change for the first time since training began. Not fear. Not hesitation. Something heavier. Chief Ramirez noticed it too. "Problem?" he asked quietly. Emily stared at the page another second before answering. "No, Chief." But her voice sounded distant now, almost pulled backward through time. The ocean wind carried across the firing lanes again while Emily adjusted the scope elevation by the smallest fraction Ethan had ever seen. One click. Then another. She closed the notebook gently and placed it beside the rifle. Logan frowned. "What is she doing?" Nobody answered him. Emily settled back behind the optic and focused far beyond the steel silhouette itself. Through the heat distortion, the terrain shifted constantly like moving water. Most shooters would track the target directly. Emily watched the air around it instead. Chief Ramirez slowly lowered his clipboard. He had seen combat snipers work before. The real ones. Quiet professionals who treated patients like a weapon. Emily looked exactly like them now. The wind monitor beeped sharply. 9 miles per hour crosswind. Then suddenly 7. Emily exhaled slowly. Her finger tightened against the trigger with almost impossible control. Crack. The rifle thundered across the valley. Then silence. The bullet traveled so far that several trainees instinctively held their breath waiting for impact. 1 second. 2. 3. Ping. The steel target rang clear and sharp through the hills. Nobody moved afterward. For a moment the entire range looked frozen beneath the cold California sky. Ethan lowered his binoculars slowly, stunned. Logan stared toward the distant target like he no longer understood what he was seeing. Chief Ramirez remained crouched beside the spotting scope without speaking at all. Then the radio clip to his vest crackled suddenly with static before a distant range officer's voice came through. Range 14 control confirms direct center hit, the voice said. A pause followed. Repeat. Direct center hit. Several instructors turned immediately toward Emily. One of them looked genuinely pale. Chief Ramirez stood slowly while keeping his eyes fixed on her. That correction pattern, he said quietly, almost to himself. I have seen it before. Emily began packing her gear calmly as if nothing unusual had happened. But before she could close the notebook, a folded photograph slipped loose from between the pages and landed beside the mat. Ethan reached down automatically to pick it up. The moment he saw the image, his expression changed completely. Because standing beside a younger Emily Carter in the photograph was a Navy sniper instructor almost every special operations trainee in America recognized by name. A man officially listed as missing 6 years earlier during an operation nobody was ever allowed to discuss. The photograph stayed in Ethan Cole's hand longer than anyone expected. Dust drifted slowly across the firing lanes while the silence around Range 14 grew heavier by the second. Emily Carter reached toward the picture calmly, but Chief Ramirez stepped forward first. Let me see that, he said quietly. Ethan handed it over without speaking. Several trainees leaned closer immediately, including Logan Pierce, whose confidence had almost completely disappeared now. The photo looked old. Sun faded around the edges. A younger Emily stood beside a tall man wearing desert camouflage and dark sunglasses near a mountain overlook somewhere overseas. The man's face alone was enough to change the atmosphere around the entire range. No way, one trainee whispered. Logan frowned hard. Who is that? Ethan answered before anyone else could. Master Chief Daniel Cross. Even the instructors went still hearing the name spoken aloud. Every sniper candidate in advanced military training knew the stories. Daniel Cross had been one of the most respected long-range instructors ever attached to naval special warfare. Some called him a legend. Others called him a ghost. Official reports said he disappeared during a classified operation 6 years earlier somewhere outside the public record. No confirmed details were ever released. Chief Ramirez kept staring at the photograph. Where did you get this? He asked Emily carefully. Emily slid the notebook into her range bag before answering. He gave it to me. Logan let out a disbelieving laugh that sounded weaker than he intended. That is impossible. Emily looked at him evenly. A lot of things seem impossible until they happen. Nobody laughed this time. Chief Ramirez turned the photograph over slowly and noticed handwritten numbers faded across. The back corner. Wind adjustments. Elevation corrections. Old sniper notes. His expression changed instantly. These are Cross's calculations, he murmured. Emily nodded once. He taught me how to read terrain before touching a trigger. The younger trainees exchanged confused looks while the instructors remained silent. Suddenly the old notebook, the perfect corrections, and the calm under pressure all made terrible sense. Logan stared at Emily like he was seeing her for the first time. You trained with him? He asked quietly. Emily hesitated before answering. For a while. Chief Ramirez folded the photograph carefully. Cross only trained active operational shooters, he said. Not candidates. Emily's eyes drifted briefly toward the distant hills. I was not a candidate back then. The words landed harder than the rifle shot earlier. Ethan watched Ramirez closely and realized the instructor already understood more than he was saying out loud. Operation Black Ridge, Ramirez said finally, almost under his breath. Emily remained silent. One of the instructors beside him looked sharply in her direction. That operation was classified, he muttered. Logan frowned again. What is Black Ridge? Nobody answered him immediately. The wind swept across the firing line while instructors exchanged uncomfortable glances. Finally Ramirez spoke carefully. 6 years ago, a reconnaissance team got trapped during a mountain extraction overseas. Communications failed. Visibility collapsed. Somebody made a shot nobody believed was possible and opened a safe corridor long enough for the team to get out. Ethan looked back toward Emily slowly. Cross was there. Ramirez nodded once without taking his eyes off her. Cross survived because of that shot. The realization spread visibly across the trainees one face at a time. Logan's expression drained completely. Emily Carter had never been trying to enter the sniper world for the first time. She had already lived inside it. Chief Ramirez stepped closer toward her. Your record said prior Army transfer with extended leave, he said quietly. Nothing about Black Ridge. Emily adjusted the strap on her range bag calmly. That was intentional. Why come here now? Ramirez asked. For the first time all morning, emotion flickered faintly across Emily's face. Not pride. Not anger. Something closer to memory. Because Master Chief Cross used to say one thing before every difficult shot, she replied softly. The moment people think they understand you is the moment you stop growing. The range remained silent after that. No whispers. No jokes. No laughter. And standing beside the firing lanes where they once mocked her openly, Logan Pierce finally understood the truth nobody else had seen at breakfast. Emily Carter had never been trying to prove she belonged there. She had been carrying history the entire time. By late afternoon, the atmosphere inside the Coronado barracks no longer resembled the same place where laughter had echoed that morning. Conversations dropped the moment Emily Carter entered a room. Trainees who once mocked her now moved aside quietly in hallways without realizing they were doing it. The rumors spreading across the base had changed shape completely. Earlier, people whispered that she was unqualified. Now they whispered about Black Ridge. About Daniel Cross. About a classified shot nobody was supposed to know existed. Emily ignored all of it. She sat alone near the back corner of the equipment bay cleaning her rifle components beneath the pale fluorescent lights while rain tapped softly against the windows outside. Every movement looked calm and precise. Bolt assembly. Scope mount. Barrel inspection. The same deliberate rhythm she had shown on the range. Ethan Cole walked in carrying 2 paper coffee cups and stopped beside her table awkwardly. Figured you might want one, he said. Emily glanced up briefly before accepting the cup. Thank you. Ethan leaned against the nearby rack of training gear. So all those stories are true? Emily adjusted the cleaning cloth through the barrel chamber carefully before answering. Most stories get bigger every time they are told. That was not really an answer. Emily finally allowed the faintest trace of a smile. Then maybe it was the right one. Ethan shook his head softly. You know everybody is talking about you now. That usually passes. Before Ethan could respond, the equipment bay door swung open sharply. Logan Pierce stepped inside alone. Gone was the loud confidence that had followed him since day one. He looked exhausted now, like somebody replaying his own words over and over inside his head. Ethan straightened immediately, sensing the tension. Logan stopped several feet from Emily's table without speaking at first. The only sound in the room came from rain tapping the windows and the quiet metallic clicks of rifle components against the table. Finally Logan exhaled heavily. I owe you an apology. Emily continued cleaning the rifle for another second before setting the cloth aside. For what? Logan frowned slightly at the question. You know for what? Emily looked at him calmly. I want to hear you say it. Ethan stayed silent near the wall while Logan shifted uncomfortably under her steady gaze. I judged you before I knew anything about you, he admitted quietly. I thought you were pretending to belong here. Emily studied him for several seconds before answering. A lot of people did. Logan glanced toward the rifle on the table. Why did you not say something earlier? About Cross. About Black Ridge. Emily leaned back slightly in the chair. Because people who need to announce what they have done usually stopped growing a long time ago. The words hit harder than Logan expected. He looked down briefly before nodding once. Fair enough. Rain continued falling outside while the equipment bay lights hummed softly overhead. Logan hesitated again before speaking. That shot today, he said quietly. Was that really the same correction pattern Cross used? Emily's expression grew distant for a moment. Every shooter leaves fingerprints somewhere, she replied. Even in the wind. Ethan noticed then that Emily never sounded proud talking about her past. If anything, she sounded tired carrying it. Logan rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. For what it is worth, he said, I was wrong about you. Emily looked directly at him. Calm blue eyes. No anger left in them at all. Respect is not loud, Logan, she said softly. It shows up in how you treat people before you know what they can do. Logan swallowed hard at that. Then he nodded once more and quietly left the equipment bay without another word. Ethan watched the door close behind him before looking back toward Emily. You could have destroyed him out there today, he said. Emily returned her attention to the rifle parts spread across the table. That was never the mission. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the Pacific while rain washed across the training compound. And somewhere deep inside the barracks, the story of Emily Carter was still spreading from room to room, changing every person who heard it. The storm passed overnight, leaving the Coronado training grounds washed clean beneath a cold silver sunrise. By 0500, the firing ranges were already alive with movement again. Boots crossed wet concrete. Instructors reviewed qualification sheets beneath portable floodlights. Helicopters rumbled faintly over the Pacific while trainees prepared for another day that suddenly felt very different from the one before it. Emily Carter arrived quietly carrying the same worn range bag over her shoulder. No escort. No attention drawn to herself. But conversation still lowered as she walked past. Not out of fear. Out of respect. Logan Pierce stood near the equipment lockers adjusting his vest straps when he noticed her approaching. This time, he straightened immediately instead of smirking. Morning, he said simply. Emily nodded once. Morning. Ethan Cole watched the exchange from nearby and almost laughed at how quickly the entire dynamic inside the unit had changed. Less than 48 hours earlier, people had treated Emily like a joke. Now trainees who once mocked her openly stepped aside without even realizing it. Chief Ramirez walked onto the range carrying a clipboard beneath one arm. Listen up, he called sharply. The trainees gathered immediately. Yesterday's qualification scores were reviewed overnight by command. Several recruits exchanged nervous looks. Ramirez glanced briefly toward Emily before continuing. One shot in particular has already been flagged for advanced review. Silence settled over the group instantly. Logan folded his arms slowly while Ethan watched Ramirez carefully. The center impact recorded at 1 mile, 140 yards now stands as the longest confirmed first-round qualification hit ever completed on this training range under active crosswind conditions. Nobody spoke afterward. The words hung over the firing line heavier than the morning fog. A few trainees turned toward Emily automatically, but she remained completely expressionless beside her gear. Chief Ramirez looked directly at the group. History does not care what somebody looks like. It cares whether they perform when it matters. Logan lowered his eyes briefly at that. Ramirez continued. A lot of you spent more time judging than learning this week. His voice hardened. That mistake ends now. The instructors dismissed the formation moments later, but nobody moved immediately. The trainees remained standing there quietly, still processing what they had just heard. Ethan glanced toward Emily. You realize everybody on this base is going to hear about this by lunch. Emily adjusted the strap on her range bag calmly. Then they will hear it. Logan stepped closer after a moment of hesitation. For what it is worth, he said quietly, I think Cross would have been proud of that shot. For the first time since arriving at Coronado, Emily's calm expression softened slightly. Not much. Just enough to reveal something human beneath all the discipline and silence she carried. He would have corrected my follow-through, she replied. Ethan laughed under his breath while even Logan managed a small smile. Then the loudspeaker crackled overhead announcing the next training rotation. Trainees began moving toward the transport trucks while the morning sun finally broke through the clouds above the Pacific. Emily lingered near range 14 one last moment before turning away. Her eyes drifted toward the distant steel targets scattered across the hillsides where the wind still moved invisibly through the terrain. Somewhere out there, years earlier, Daniel Cross had once taught her that real shooters never wasted energy proving themselves to crowds. Crowds changed too easily. Respect built through consistency lasted longer. Emily adjusted the notebook beneath her arm and walked toward the trucks without another word. Around her, conversation slowly resumed again, but the laughter from breakfast was gone completely now. In its place remained something quieter. Something earned. And as the California morning light spread across the firing range where history had just been made, everyone who watched Emily Carter walk away understood the same truth at exactly the same time. Legends rarely introduce themselves. They simply let the moment speak for them.